In this video, I'm going to go through the solutions to the tips for chapter 2. You were supposed to pick out of the two questions only one, and the first one is Jay is working in an electronics store. She earns $600 a week plus a commission of 5% of her sales. First, you're supposed to write a function to describe Jay's total weekly earning as a function of her sale. We know that this is a linear equation. The slope or rate of change is 5%, which in decimal is 0.05, and the y-intercept or the base pay is 600. So we can write that y, which stands for the earning, is equal to 600, the base pay, plus 0.05 x. X is the amount of sales that she does in a week. The next part is to determine the inverse of the function. So this means that I have to solve for x. To do that one, I'm going to move 600 to the left. I get 0.05x is y minus 600. Then I divide by 0.05, and I'm going to get x is equal to y minus 600 over 0.05. And the last step, as we know, we are going to replace x with y minus 1, which is the inverse function, is equal to, and replace y with x, so x minus 600 divided by 0.05. The next part of the question asks, what does the inverse represent? The inverse in this case represents the total sales if the weekly pay is given. So if I know how much is going to be paid, I can find the total sales using the inverse function. Now this last part of the question says, if J earns $775, how much is her sales that week? So I'm going to use the inverse function, and I'm going to say S, the sales, is equal to 775 minus 600 divided by 0.05. I'm just using the formula that we found before here. This was the formula. So I'm just substituting 775, which is her total pay, and then subtracting 600 divided by 0.05, which is going to give me $3,500. So her total sales has to be $3,500 in a week. So her pay becomes $775 for that week. The second question was about a rock which is thrown from the top of a 100-meter cliff. The height h in meters after t seconds is given by the function f of t. H of t is equal to 100 minus 5t squared. State the domain and range of h of t. This is part 1. If I look at h of t, I can write h of t is negative 5t squared plus, there is no term which has t by itself, so I'm going to write 0t plus 100. Now, if you look at this one, then I can write this guy as minus 5 t minus 0 squared plus 100, because t minus 0 is going to give me t. Now, if you compare this one with the general form, the vertex form of a quadratic, you can see that the vertex here is going to be 0 and 100. This means since a is negative 5, parabola opens downward, so the maximum the coordinate of the maximum is 0, 100. Now this means the following, that our domain is going to be t in R, and since t represents time, t has to be greater than or equal to 0, and our range is h, which is going to be in R. But if you look at this one, the maximum of h is 100 meters, so h has to be less than or equal to 100, but at the same time, since h represents the distance, it has to be greater than or equal to 0. So this is our domain and range. Part B of the question says determine the inverse of h of t. Remember that h is 100 minus 5t squared. So from here, if I move negative 5t squared to the right, left, and h to the right, I get 5t squared is 100 minus h, or t squared divided by 5. I'm going to get 100 minus h over 5. So t is square root of 100 minus h over 5. You may have a tendency of putting plus or minus, but since time is always positive, I'm not going to include the negative symbol here. Now we have to find the domain and range of this function. We can either find it using t equals square root of 100 minus h over 5, or since this is the inverse, we know that the domain of the inverse is the range of the function, and the range of the inverse is the domain of the main function. So I can write that the domain of the inverse is going to be, oh, I forgot here that I have to replace t with h minus 1 is equal to square root of 100 minus t over 5. So the domain of h minus 1 is going to be t in R and t has to be less than or equal to 100, and obviously has to be greater than or equal to 0, and our range is going to be h, which is in R, and h has to be greater than or equal to 0. The last part of the question says that a second rock is thrown upward. The equation is given by the equation here. It says solve for t by finding the inverse, then determine at what time the rock will hit the ground. To solve this equation for t, I'm going to write h is equal to negative 5t squared plus 10t plus 100. Now I'm going to bring h to the right. I get negative 5t squared plus 10t plus 100 minus h is equal to 0. Now I'm going to use the quadratic formula. I'm going to say that t, the two roots, are equal to minus b minus 10 plus or minus b squared. 10 squared is 100 minus 4a. A is negative 5, and c is 100 minus h over 2a, which is 2 times negative 5. This one is going to give me negative 10 plus or minus square root of, if you simplify under the square root, we get 2100 minus 20h over negative 10. This is the inverse function. Now it says at what time the rock will hit the ground. Remember, when the rock hit the ground, h is going to become 0, the height. So we will find that T12 is negative 10 plus or minus square root of 2100 minus 20 times 0 over negative 10. This will give us two values. If we go with the addition here, we get negative 3.5, which we are not going to accept it because time has to be positive. If we go with the negative root, we are going to get 5.58 seconds, which is acceptable. So we say after 5.58 seconds, the rock will hit the ground.